If you're from my vintage, you would recognize that introduction. It's from the movie Exodus. What is Exodus all about? Why was there a movie made? Well, the Israelites had been under Egyptian rule for just over 430 years. And the time came for the Lord to deliver them out of the hands of the Egyptians. Pharaoh had been particularly cruel on them. He had even ordered that all the boys that were born to Jewish families should be drowned in the River Nile. God sent the plagues. With each plague, Pharaoh was warned, and Pharaoh said that the Israelites could leave. But when it came to leaving, he realized he would have no slaves, and he rescinded on his decision. And back they came. And after 9 failed attempts, the Lord says to Moses, Moses, enough's enough. What we need to do is, I really need to deal with these people now. And he says, this is what I want you to do, Moses. I want you to go to your people. And I want you to tell your people that they are to sacrifice a lamb, a 1-year-old lamb or goat. But it needs to be the pride of the flock. And I want you to slaughter it. And I want you to take the blood of the lamb. And I want you to take hyssop, which is much like a shrub or a bush. And I want you to paint the pillars and the lintel of your doors. And then I want you to eat the lamb. Either eat it on your own or eat it as a family or invited guests if it's too big. But I want you to eat it until it is completely eaten. And if there should be any left over, I want you to burn it on a fire. I don't want you to boil this lamb. I want you to roast the lamb. And so Moses goes to his people and he gives them the instructions as the Lord had commanded him to do. And on that night, the people slaughtered a lamb in a sacred place. And they took the blood of their lamb, and with the hyssop they painted their pillars, their doorposts, their lantern, their lintels. And they got ready for what was due to happen. Because God had said that I'm going to pass over the tribes of Israel, and I'm going to go right through the land of Egypt, and I'm going to put to death the firstborn in every Egyptian home. And so it was at midnight that the angel of death swept over Egypt. And in sweeping over Egypt, the firstborn of every household in Egypt was put to death. But the Israeli homes were spared. And it was this that began the Exodus. And the Exodus was the movement away from Pharaoh and from Egypt towards the promised land, a journey that was to take roughly 40 years from Egypt into the promised land at Canaan. It wasn't going to be easy. Moses' first encounter was when he got to the Red Sea. How were they going to go through the Red Sea? How were they going to get across to the other side? For sure, Pharaoh's armies would be chasing them to get them back. And so began the Exodus of 40 years. So began the tradition of Pesach, as we know it in Christian terms, the Passover. This evening we are going to be looking at Pesach, which is the Jewish celebrations which are currently on. And as you know, I mentioned in February that I would be doing the series over Easter weekend. And this would have been the first in the church, celebrating the Pesach meal, the Passover. This is only Act 1. We will move to the Pesach table to do Act 2. So wait with me as I make my way to the Pesach table. We are now in the home of a Jewish family, and we are about to have the Pesach Seder. The children are getting dressed. Mom has prepared everything and it's laid out on the table. And Father is waiting to start the Pesach meal, which is the Pesach Seder. And unfortunately, my prayer shawl and my yarmulke has gotten missing somewhere in the move. But in order to do the prayer service, I have to ensure that my head is covered and that I'm ready to do the prayer service. This celebration, which is currently being celebrated by Jewish homes, is one that was orchestrated before the Israelites even left Egypt. Because God said to Moses, Moses, I want you to tell your people that they should remember this day for the rest of their lives. And so Pesach is celebrated at this time every year. In a normal occasion, you would have the many thousands upon thousands of Israelis going to Jerusalem. It's one of the 3 festivals that the Jewish people try and get to Jerusalem, in particular, to where the temple was and where the current temple is. When I say there are 3 celebrations, they go for Rosh Hashanah, they go for Yom Kippur, and they go for Pesach. Now, your traditional ceremony at the opening night of Pesach will differ. And that is for simple reasons that you have many categories of Jewish people. You've got the ultra-Orthodox. Now, the ultra-Orthodox are those Jews who live entirely by the law of Moses, the Torah. They don't deviate from it at all. And you will find them generally staying in communities. They stay together. They dress very, I won't say peculiarly, because they dress in the fashion that the ancient Israelis would have dressed. And they are significant. You can pick them out. In general, they stay in a place called the Mea Sharim, which is a very orthodox area. You will see the young boys running around playing, and you will be able to identify them because they have a long curl that comes off the last thread of their hair, and that they call their palas. You will see the fathers walking around, their heads covered, normally with a hat, normally with a black coat, white shirt, and out from underneath their shirt or their jacket, you will see the threads of their prayer shawl, which we call the tzitzi. You will see them hanging out. The mothers will be visible every now and then, but they will have their heads covered. These people are extremely orthodox, and in fact, they don't like anybody coming into the Mea Sharim. They don't like tourists coming in. And if a tourist should come in, you need to make sure that you are properly attired, otherwise you will be thrown out post haste. Over the years, obviously with change happening, much has happened within the Jewish faith. Many people are still Orthodox, but you have got a movement, latter movement, which is the Reformed Jews. And they have obviously changed many of the routines around the Pesach table. We're going to keep our Pesach table as orthodox as we possibly can. And I will begin to tell you what is happening on this particular table. All our crockery and cutlery is new. It's not necessarily brand new, but it certainly hasn't been used for a year. It has been thoroughly cleaned, and it has been put away, and it has been brought out by Mother for the purposes of the Pesach meal. Now, the Pesach Seder plate is the plate which is in front of me, and it's completely representative of incidents that happened during the time of the Israelites in Egypt. Now, if you look at my plate, you will see that there are a number of items here. We have our horseradish, which is bitter, and that signifies the fact that the time that the Israelites were under Egyptian captivity, it was a very, very, very bitter experience. Then we have a symbol of the mortar which would have been used by the Israelites when it came to building operations that they were required to do as the slaves of the Egyptians. Then you get the lamb shank bone. The lamb shank bone is a representation of the lamb that was slaughtered, the paschal lamb that was slaughtered, ready for the blood to be taken, to be smeared onto the pillars and the lintels. Then you have the greenery which represents new life, which represents spring, which represents all those things that are good and fresh. And that was the new opportunity that was being afforded to the Israelites by God, and when they were going to be taken out and into the 40 years in the wilderness as they made their way to Canaan. Now, the egg is particularly of significance because if we consider a hard-boiled egg, which that is, the hard-boiled egg represents the hard times that the people had under Pharaoh in Egypt. If we dip the egg into water and we allow it to drip, drips that you see dripping there represent the tears of the people that were under extreme hardship under Pharaoh. Then we have the salt water. Now the salt water, that represents the tears that were shed by the people, but the salt water freshens up that water, and they were looking for a new, fresh life. We know that if I move to the front of the table, that these covered areas here represent the matzos as we know it today. Then it would have been the unleavened bread. The unleavened bread would have been there because the people were in a hurry to get going, and they would have to bake bread to have with their meal, but there would be no time for that bread to rise. So it's unleavened bread. Now in the Jewish home, before we have our Pesach meal, you find that the mother and the daughters will make sure that their house is thoroughly cleaned. They will take a feather, a broom, and a little dustpan, and they will ensure that there is not one single crumb from leavened bread anywhere. They will clean out their pantries. If there is a lot of food stuff that is leavened, they will make sure that they either give it away to a Gentile or they make sure they eat it before the Passover, but there will be nothing left, not one scrap. What they will do is they will take the middle matzah and they will break the middle matzah in half. Now, if you look at that, I've tried to break it in half. That is the bigger, that is the smaller. They will keep the bigger one to have with their meal, and they will hide this one because one of the important things is to keep the young children occupied. So somebody will go and hide this. At the end of the meal together, they will send the children out at the end of the meal to go and look for the piece of matzah which has been hidden somewhere in the house. That is to keep the children occupied, and it happens just before they have their dessert. You will notice that there are 4 glasses of wine. Each adult will have 4 glasses of wine in front of them, and throughout the ceremony, while the ceremony is on, they will have time in which they have to drink the wine at certain parts in the program. Now, with a revision over time of this activity, when things changed and they started to adapt the Pesach meal, a lot of scholars got together and they decided to write a Haggadah. Now, this is the Haggadah which they will have their service recorded, and everything will be on the Haggadah. And so the people will have the Haggadah in front of them, and they will be able to follow the order of the service. Now, as I said, the critical elements of the Pesach meal, the Seder meal, is the wine and is the unleavened bread. And in order to bless the wine and bless the bread, there will be a prayer. And I read the prayer to you as it is in English. It says in the Haggadah, "Blessed be the Lord, the King of all the universe, and that which he grants us." Now, that is the prayer, but quite clearly it wouldn't be said like that. It would be said in typical Hebrew, and there is a tinge now and then of Arabic or that you find in the Haggadah. But the prayer goes like this, and he will start to pray for the wine first, because that is extremely important, and then he will pray for the bread, although they will eat the bread first and then drink the wine and then go into their meal. But the prayer goes as follows, and I'll say it in Hebrew so that you can get a feel for the real occasion. The prayer goes as follows: Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech olam. And then the specific aspect that relates to the wine, he will say, Baorlen Peri Hagafen. Now he's said the whole prayer, Baruch atah Adonai melech Eloheinu halam, and then for the wine. And then he will say the prayer for the bread again. It's exactly the same beginning, because it says, "Blessed be the Lord our God, the King of all the universe, who has granted us from the ground bread. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech olam." And then he prays specifically for the bread. And then he will say the following: Hamotzi lechem min ra'aharef. And then he has prayed for the bread. And now they are ready to go into the family meal. And the family meal will be held by the family. And what will then take place is the entire story that I shared with you in Act 1 will be told to the children, and this will be reinforced every year so that they never, ever forget the great work of God in that he delivered them out of the land of the Egyptians. And so Act 2 draws to a close. We know why they are doing what they are doing at this time of the year and the significance of it in terms of their faith. We know why it is that they remember that enormous event that took place in Egypt when the Israelites were set free. And now we will move to Act 3, where we see another hugely significant event taking place.
May the Lord protect and defend you. May he always shield you from shame. May you come to be in Israel a shining name. May you be like Ruth and like Esther. May you be deserving of praise. Strengthen them, O Lord, and keep them from the stranger's way. May God bless you and grant you long life.
May the Lord fulfill our Sabbath prayer for you. May God make you good mothers and
May He send you
wives.
husbands who will care for you. May the Lord protect and defend you. May the Lord preserve you from favor them, O Lord, with happiness, for hear our Sabbath
It was probably early afternoon when Jesus was in Jerusalem that he sent two of his disciples and said, "Go into the inner city, and there you will find a man, and you will tell him to take you to the room that he has prepared for us. And I want you to set it up because I want to have the Passover meal with you." That would have been what we referred to early on as the Pesach Seder. And so they went and they set up the place where everything was fresh and ready, and they got it ready, and Jesus and his disciples went up to that room where they were to have what we today in the Christian church know as the Last Supper. And they would have been lounging around because it was customary in those times that you lay around for the Pesach Seder meal. And that's why we read that, and even one of the disciples was lying up against him because you were resting, you were relaxing. It was a joyous celebration. There was so much to think about. There was so much to talk about. You were remembering the release of the people of Israel from the hands of Pharaoh. It was a joyous festival. It was a happy occasion. And so as a result, even today, if you say to an Israeli person, a Jew as we know them today, you say the word Shach Sameach. Now, Shach Sameach is another word of saying happy festival, happy celebration. It is a happy festival. You've been released after 430 years in captivity. You are now released, and Jesus wants to spend the last few hours of his life with his disciples. He has warned them about what is to transpire. He has told them that he is going to die. He shared with them all the experiences that are recorded in the Old Testament, the prophecies that had been made about his death. And now he wants to have dinner with them. And so we have them sitting around, lazing around, lying around, enjoying the Pesach meal, recounting the story as it happened many, many, many years before. And then we come to an extremely significant part in the celebration, because Jesus takes on a new form. He's about to do something that is to foretell of that great event that is about to happen. Great, but in certain instances, tragic. Yet when it culminates at the end of the Easter weekend for us, we will fully realize the significance of what we are now about to celebrate together. Yes, it is sad that we are not together in the church tonight. It is sad that we are not performing the ceremony that we are going to perform now together. But I hope that many of you have settled comfortably in your homes. And I hope that you've put out for yourself a glass of wine or grape juice as we customarily do. And I hope that you've got your unleavened bread, just as Jesus would have had. He would have had his wine, he would have had his unleavened bread, and he stands up. He stands up because he is now about to do something that is hugely significant. He speaks to his disciples about what is about to happen, but he needs to have some way in which he can symbolize what is about to happen and give some teaching to this time together. In a typical Pesach Seder, there is very little teaching. There is very little preaching. All that there is that there is a reenactment of what had happened in Egypt under Pharaoh. But Jesus needs to make it more significant. And so it is that Jesus takes from the table where they are seated, he takes the wine. And I'm sure that he does the Baruch Atah Adonai Melech Elam Ohalam Eloheinu. I'm sure he does that all over again. And I'm sure that as he blesses the wine, it's Borabi Peri Achetz. I'm sure he says all that. And I'm sure he blesses the wine first, because that would have been the custom that he had grown up with. And then I'm sure as he takes the bread, he would have blessed that bread and he would have done the Baruch Atah Adonai Melech Eloheinu Olam, and he would have blessed the bread. But then comes the significant part, and I want you just to be prayerful with me as we enact, because in his own words Jesus said, as often as you do this, instructing us that this is what he wanted us to do, and this is what we are doing tonight. And there is no problem with us doing what we are doing tonight in the comfort of our own homes. There is nowhere in Scripture where we are forbidden to break bread together. And so we find on many an occasion families break bread together. But Jesus took the bread, and as he broke that bread, he says, this is my body. As often as ye eat of this, you will do it in remembrance of me. He clearly states that we will do it in remembrance of him. It's a symbol. It's a symbol given to us to not only remember the Egyptian captivity of the Israeli people, but to remember what was about to happen. And we would only realize the significance of this event in a couple of hours' time. But he has told us to remember it. And just as the Israeli Jewish family remember Pesach thousands of years after the Passover actually happened, so many, many years after what transpired on the Easter weekend, we have the privilege of remembering that this is my body, which is broken for you. As often as you eat of it, you do so in remembrance of me. And so he took the bread, and as he broke it, he gave it to his disciples. I want one of the senior members in each household that is taking communion with me tonight to take from the person that is giving them bread, to take that bread and retain it. And then we are just going to remain in a silent word of prayer and before we eat together. As we sit silently with the bread, which is a symbol of his body broken for us, I just want to remind you of those wonderful words, wounded for me, wounded for me. There on the cross, he was wounded for me. Gone my transgressions, and now I am free, all because Jesus was wounded for me. This is my body, said he. As often as you eat it, you will do it in remembrance of me. Let us eat together. Likewise, after they had had supper, he took the cup, and holding the cup, he said, "This is my blood that is shed for you. As often as ye drink of it, ye do so in remembrance of me." This is the blood of the new covenant, which I shed for you. As you take the blood, your grape juice, whatever you have, as a remembrance, it's only a symbol. It doesn't represent anything other than the symbol of the blood that was shed for you. As you take the cup, please retain the cup. If you have a cup like we have this evening, which will be passed around, as you take the cup, the first person to take the cup, just hold it. Because we're going to pray for that cup. It's going to be a prayer of thanksgiving, because it was blood and water that flowed mingling down. So as you take the cup, the first person, just retain it. And then we will drink together as we pass it one to the other. God our Father, we remind ourselves that as that crown of thorns was placed on your head, blood streamed down your forehead. Lord, we remember that as the nails were pierced through your hands, that blood flowed down your body. We are reminded that when that spear was thrust into your side, blood and water came oozing out. And so, Lord, as we take this cup this evening, the cup of the new covenant, that bond that was made new with us, when you took upon yourself the sin of the world, it was for us. And so we remind ourselves again, you were wounded for our transgressions. You were bruised for our iniquities, and the chastisement of our peace was upon your head. And you gave yourself for us. A man who knew no sin took upon himself the sin of the world. And so we take the cup of the new covenant. And as often as we do this in memory of what he did for us. Let us drink together. And night is falling. It's a traumatic night for our Lord, because he knows what is going to happen the next day. And so he decides that he is going to move out of that upper room. He has announced that there is one that is sitting in that room who will betray him. And he dismisses them all. But all bar one journey with him as they make their way out of Jerusalem, more than likely out of Damascus Gate, down into the Kidron Valley, up into the upper levels of the river Kidron. And there is a garden of Gethsemane. And in that garden of Gethsemane, Jesus takes himself off, takes with him two of his disciples who he positions in a specific place and tells them to pray. And he goes to pray. And so will begin our final act, Act 4. I find this part of our service tonight very significant in many ways. In many ways, it pulls together everything that we have done this evening so far. It's in the Garden of Gethsemane at the Mount of Olives, where Jesus often went to pray, that he finds himself again. He finds himself there because he is in agony. Clearly, we see that when it is midnight when this is happening, and he separates his disciples into two groups, takes two with him, but doesn't take them to where he's going to pray. He leaves them at a place where he says to them, watch and pray, But he goes further on his own. And there he prays, and we read that he prays the following prayer. If it be your will, Father, please take this cup away from me. Just before we came to this Act 4, we dealt with the cup of the new covenant, the blood which was shed for me. In a real sense, I believe that he is saying, take away the agony that I'm due to go through when I am going to let blood and water go filtering down my body, flowing like a river. It's agony. He's sweating blood. And he gets up to check on his two disciples who he has left praying, and they're sleeping. They have no idea of what's going to happen. And he wakes them up and he says, didn't I just ask you a simple favor? You know, I align that to the many simple favors he asks of us. And yet we fall asleep. We become lethargic. We give up. And so he goes back to pray. And you know, he prays the same thing. Father, if it be your will, take this cup away from me. But he goes back and he finds them sleeping again. And then he leaves them. But the third time he's begging almost. He's pleading. He's on his hands and knees and he's asking his father, just like a son would ask a father to be let off something. He is asking, if it be your will, but not your will, not my will, but your will be done. All of a sudden there is a noise. There is light appearing, and it's after midnight, and there are flames and there are torches, and there are soldiers and there are officers from Caiaphas, the high priest. And one person comes walking towards Jesus, and Jesus says, Judas. And I'm sure he says to him, young man or fellow, what purpose brings you here? In other words, what are you here for, Judas? And at that point, Judas walks up and he kisses Jesus. And Jesus says to Judas, is it with a kiss that you will betray the Son of Man? With that, he turns to the soldiers and the officers. And he says, what are you here for? And they respond, we are looking for Jesus of Nazareth. And he says, it is I. And with that, they collapse prostrate on the ground. As they would say in Afrikaans, hulle het groot geskrik. They got the fright of their lives. And it was at that point that he could have just walked away, free. But he doesn't. Because he realizes that if this wasn't to happen, then the purpose for which he had been sent, the action that was going to be met out the next day, and the work on Calvary would all be in vain. And so he just waits. And then he asks them again, who are you looking for? And they say, we are looking for Jesus of Nazareth. And his response is not changing. It is I. Peter, standing nearby, is irate. He sees one of the soldiers with a sword, and he says, shall I take out the sword? And he grabs the sword before he can even get an answer, and he whips off the ear of one of the soldiers. Jesus, as we learned last week, when we looked at human behavior, simply picks up the ear, puts it back in place, and heals the soldier. And they grab him. And he says, do you come to catch me, to grab me and take me in like a thief or a robber, when I have been sitting every day in your temple, preaching and teaching, but you come at night to catch a thief by night? And they lead him off. And some of the disciples follow, but there are some who are wary that they will be seen with him. And they take him to Caiaphas' place. And there at midnight, or after midnight, these people seek to find fault with Jesus. But it's only until the next morning where Jesus gets brought before Pontius Pilate do things take a drastic turn. And so the curtain closes on our evening together. There's been very little by way of preaching. There's been very little by way of teaching. We have simply shared together a Pesach meal. We've looked at the history of the Israelites as they are set free out of bondage from Egypt. We have done that most significant event that we could possibly do, and that is to share the Last Supper and a communion together. We've gone up to the Garden of Gethsemane and we've lived the agony that Jesus lived. And now we are down back in the city, back in the household of the chief priest, Caiaphas, where Jesus is being tried for something which they have no legal basis. They have no right. Yet, after midnight, the agony continues. Thank you for joining me this evening. Thank you for spending time as a family, taking communion. Thank you for the opportunity of being able to take communion with you in your own homes. Maybe next year we won't have the 11th plague and we will be able to do it in church formally. But I trust that you have enjoyed this time together. And I look forward to being with you again tomorrow at 11 o'clock as we await Pontius Pilate's proclamation. And then we will move on through the day. And at 3 o'clock, we will go with Mary and John, the other disciples that were brave enough to be there. And we will hear the echoes coming from the cross. It is finished. So thank you and have a wonderful evening together. God bless you all.